Hello, Augies Worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, here with another episode of Ask Dave. Today's question comes from Beau Wells, and he is WA5TNI. And he says, first off, I love the channel. Glad that you do. Thank you. I am installing a Butternut HF9V in a cattle pasture. Oh, I know that antenna well. I've got one, but it's all worn out. It's just been sitting outside for what, 20, 30 years, maybe more than that. And I rebuilt it completely once, but it just stopped working then again because of the joints just got all worn out on it. I'm installing a Butternut HF9V in a cattle pasture. As such, I'm wanting to protect both the vertical and the radials from damage. Let me tell you something about cows, or in this case, cattle, which are actually, cows are female. So it's bulls are male and steer are former bulls. Okay, I'll let you figure out the rest. But he's got a cattle. Cattle is the right name for cows and bulls. The combined, we call them cattle. Or farmers call them cattle. Most people in the big city call them cows, which actually only refers to the female of the species. Okay, as such, and he says cattle, so I know that he's an actual rancher. As such, I am wanting to protect both the vertical and the radials from damage. Good point, because cattle tend to push up against anything they can push up against, including fences. And if the fence isn't made of barbed wire, the cattle will push it over, just push it right over. Those cattle weigh close to a ton, and there's no fence that's going to stand up to something like that. So that's where barbed wire comes in. I'm considering putting up a barbed wire fence around the outside edge of the radials, and maybe even using the metal fence posts to tie the ends of the radials to, since the ground is 101% rock. Should I be concerned about interference from the metal wire fence and posts? Before we jump into answering these questions, I'd like to pay a special thank you to Dave Sanftberg. S-A-N-F-T, Berg, B-E-R-G. And David, thank you very much. David is one of my newest patrons on Patreon. You too can become a patron of this channel by going to patreon.com/KE0OG and picking a method that works for you. Now let's look at his question here. Okay, first of all, he's very wise to put the thing in a cattle pasture. Second, is very wise for wanting to protect the radials. The radials are just wire. A cow is very heavy, putting a lot of force on a not very big hoof that'll just snap that wire, and you won't even hear the sound. It'll be so subtle. So as they try to get up to the antenna, and of course they're going to try and push the antenna over, and will succeed. Okay, so he wants to put up a barbed wire fence around the outside edge of the radials. So let's take a look at this. We're going to do a vertical or plan view. Here's the antenna. Here are the radials. I'm going to suggest 25-foot radials, that you get a roll of and let's see, 100, that would be 500 feet, THHN, single, it's a single wire made of stranded 7 strands. It's insulated. This refers to the insulation. I'd put in insulated radials, okay? And you can pick that up at Home Depot for like less than $100. That's your radials out there. So this distance from here to here and from here to here is 50 feet. So if we take 50 and multiply it by 3. It's 150, the 3.1. It's, let's just say 160 feet for the barbed wire fence. Okay. Now, to answer the question specifically, the first rule of antennas is that everything affects everything. Okay? I would recommend insulated wire for your radials and leave the ends floating. You can tie them down to the ground with a lawn staple or something like that, but just don't ground them at the end. This is a counterpoise. The radials are a counterpoise. Okay? It acts as a reactive capacitance element that gives the antenna something to work against. Where you want it grounded is right there. So you can connect a ground rod right there, connect the radial field to it. And of course, you're going to have an insulator and then your antenna. And in the case of the Butternut HF9V, all that's built in. Okay, so now your compound is going to look like this. And you're going to have at 4 feet high, 3 foot high, 2 feet high, and 1 feet high. You've got this metal all the way around. This will be grounded just by the very nature of a barbed wire fence. Don't connect the ends of the radials to the posts. You can use some rope or something to tie it to it or whatever to make them stick out straight. Contrary to popular belief, a radial field does not have to be absolutely perfect. And what happens is the radio wave propagates out all of these, and then you get a bounce back factor, since these are all open-ended transmission lines. And that's how you get the, this thing holds some energy and then pushes it back. And the way you tune the antenna helps it work. I will tell you that before you finish tuning this antenna, put this up, because this, of course, it goes around in here. This will affect the antenna tune. So if you put up this first, get it tuned, and then put this up after, it will affect the tune. So leave yourself a little gate so that you can get in. It doesn't matter if you walk on these, really. You're not a cow. You're not going to break the wire. And then tune this antenna. I will tell you that it's a stinker to tune, especially the 40 to 30 interaction. Okay? And the way to do it is to have a friend sit in the ham shack and run the SWR meter in the ham shack to look for lowest SWR, and then move something 3/4 of an inch and step to the side. Have it checked, so you got your handy talk, your phones or whatever, and until you get this thing tuned right. It's the 40-30 that's the hard part to tune. 80, you should be able to tune whatever segment you want to be on 80. It's only about 50 kilohertz wide. You should be able to get down to about 1-to-1. On some of the higher bands, that's a little harder. The antenna is very interesting technically, but it's also very expensive. And it does work well when it works. Okay, so when you get it all set up, this should work very well for you. Well, Beau, there you have it. And I hope all others listening will have picked up something new from this. This is kind of a new twist on an antenna, putting an enclosure around it that is by necessity metal. And it's traditional barbed wire. If there is one invention that won the West in the U.S., it's barbed wire. People think, first of all, the railroad, but no, it's actually barbed wire. Because otherwise, everybody roamed free and people had trouble keeping their cattle apart. And there were sheep herders out there. I mean, people were shooting each other in the range wars. People died in the range wars. And then finally, barbed wire came along and people could fence off the sections that belonged to them. And there are lots of different kinds of barbed wire. Anyway, You've got an HF9V, put the thing together extremely carefully, observing the dimensions to the millimeter. Be sure to use that coppery butter stuff that says it's not butter on it, to put that on there, and that will work very well. If that doesn't come with DX Engineering's, order a can of that from them. They'll know what you mean when you talk to them. Okay, and of course everything affects everything. And so your final tuning will be after you put up the barbed wire fence. So be sure to put a gate in it and a lock and chain on it. And lay those wires out on the ground. Do not ground the ends of them. Let them just be a counterpoise. Your ground may be horrible. That doesn't really matter because the radials, if you put in enough radials, it doesn't matter whether you have a ground there or not. So you'll be in good shape with doing that. And I suspect you'll have many days and evenings of fine DX enjoyment and competitive enjoyment on that particular antenna. So there you have it. Until we next meet, 73.